McLaren's Formula One prospects look bright. It's a vibrant organisation on a clear upwards trajectory, with the top teams in its sight. But not that long ago, things were considerably worse. In fact, the team's most senior figure claims that McLaren was fighting for survival as recently as late 2020. While attention has mostly been on the on-track improvements that have made McLaren an F1 race winner again, secretly the team had to save itself from a growing financial turmoil. In 2020, the McLaren Group's financial state was well documented. There was even talk of potential insolvency for the F1 team's parent company. In response to the coronavirus pandemic, there were redundancies in the racing division as well as the wider company as part of a massive effort to address this growing crisis. McLaren needed a major cash influx from majority owner Bahrain's Mumtalakat Group and then secured a $150 million loan with Bahrain's National Bank to stem the tide. The F1 team looked vulnerable to knock-on effects, and so there was a high degree of urgency to conclude the eventual sale of a significant minority stake in the McLaren racing division too. But this was always stated in the context of securing the necessary investment to continue the progress to the front of the F1 grid. There was never any explicit suggestion the sale represented salvation from immediate or long-term danger. So it may come as a surprise to hear McLaren Racing CEO Zak Brown speak of that process in such blunt terms as, ultimately, we were fighting for survival. That conjures images of fallen F1 giants and struggling minnows. It's difficult to think of McLaren, one of F1's oldest, greatest and most popular teams, in the same context as those that have been swallowed up by such situations. Although when you consider Williams went through its own upheaval over a longer period, with the even more extreme solution of a complete sale, it seems a little less far-fetched. Last December, McLaren Racing agreed a £185 million buy-in from MSP Sports Capital. That gave the consortium of US sports investors an initial 15% stake, rising to a maximum of 33% by the end of 2022. Brown considers that deal McLaren's biggest moment during his tenure, which began in late 2016. And that's saying something given the milestones he's been a part of include the split with Honda, the switch to Renault and the return to Mercedes, hiring the likes of Andreas Seidel and James Key, securing the go-ahead to build a new wind tunnel and of course winning again in 2021. But he told us in an interview late last year that without MSP's investment we might not be sitting here. Now we're sitting here extremely healthy, having just bought an IndyCar team and we started an Extreme E team. We're fighting Ferrari, we've got great drivers, we've got a great team, we've got a great wind tunnel coming. I look at where we are 12 months on, it's night and day. Before we get into exactly what McLaren's moved on from, we wanted to pause quickly to share something with you. 2 of our F1 podcasts have been nominated in the motorsports category at the Sports Podcast Awards. We're incredibly proud of this and grateful to our audience for supporting our shows. So if you'd like to help the Race F1 podcast or our classic F1 series Bring Back V10s win an award, head to sportspodcastawards.com/categories/20 to cast your vote for free. If Brown's words sound like an overstatement, it's probably because McLaren did a good job of keeping a lid on the potential consequences of its problems. The fact the F1 team was performing well on track and had projects on the go off track had many assuming it may be independent enough to be protected from the group's turmoil, and that at worst, things might just get a little tight. Then there were obvious signs of the pressure easing. First the MSP deal for McLaren Racing, and since then McLaren's iconic Woking headquarters has been sold and leased back on a long-term deal to raise more funds. So McLaren never really let on that it was in trouble, and the group itself has since done even more to improve its situation. Plus, some of the hints of the company's struggles were conveniently disguised at the time by the coronavirus pandemic. For example, the closure of the factory during F1's mandated shutdown and the UK government lockdown meant construction of the wind tunnel and simulator was paused. But it didn't resume as soon as the F1 team went back to work, because the money wasn't there to give those major capital expenditure projects the green light. Despite all the indications that McLaren Racing was insulated, it appears it was more serious than made out at the time. To that, Brown only admits it was pretty serious. That's why he and his management team wanted the extent of McLaren's problems to be on a need-to-know basis. Media reports about the McLaren Group's plight, which he says were 90% accurate, made that tougher, as did the fact that Brown likes to be very transparent with the race team. but he felt this knowledge would be an unhelpful burden, so the truth was even kept from McLaren personnel. Brown said that was very difficult to do because the race team was performing, but the financial challenges at group level were beginning to roll down to his side of the company. So along with team principal Seidel, Brown's priority was to make sure the race team didn't get concerned by something out of its control. In his words, there's a huge storm coming, but they can't do anything about it. Brown says, that's our job as a leadership team at times to insulate, and we worry about things they can't worry about. I'm really pleased with the outcome because now we're just really healthy and don't have any worries. But we were not in good shape until we brought the investment on from MSP, which is something that I'd worked on for 6 months. There would likely have been an alternative solution for McLaren's F1 team had the deal not gone through. It might have been finding another investor or another bailout from the Bahrainis. And this may again imply that talk of a fight for survival is a little overblown. But an alternative solution doesn't mean an identical one. Likely it was less that McLaren would be fighting hand to mouth that instant, and more that there was a big long-term problem on the horizon. In this scenario, McLaren suffers from a reduced budget, lower ambitions, less success, a drop in revenue, and a potentially devastating negative cycle. That's exactly the sort of thing that can lead to hand-to-mouth status. Just look at how it engulfed Williams, or even lost giants like Lotus and Brabham. Now McLaren's situation is much healthier. Brown describes the team as having the level of resources you came to know McLaren to have. That means being financially as powerful as Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull. So while there's still some time to go before McLaren's new wind tunnel and simulator means it has equal technologies, the team will at least not be fighting one-handed in the long run. At the same time, the McLaren group is still working to improve its own situation. Brown reckons that will happen under Group Chairman Paul Walsh, who joined just before the start of the pandemic. So now the racing division is part of a company that's becoming increasingly healthy again, but it also seems detached enough and prosperous enough to be entirely unconcerned. Brown calls the racing division its own entity, with separate funding and 67% McLaren Group ownership, and the upshot is McLaren Racing is now in super strong shape. That sets McLaren up to confidently stride into F1's new era. And the case for the team ending its exile from F1's top table in the next few years is stronger than ever. The chance of that happening would have been vanishingly thin had a wider financial crisis ended differently, whether the F1 team's survival was in question or not. So Brown says, I sit back 12 months on, knowing how fragile we were. Even though on track we were doing strong, I knew, my leadership team knew, the shareholders knew what a fragile state we were in. Trying to find the balance between full throttle and fighting for survival at the same time without letting the world know, even though the media was reporting about it and it was getting closer and closer and closer, that was a highly stressful time. Now that we've gone through it, it's highly rewarding and highly motivating. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Are you surprised to learn of the situation McLaren found itself in 2020, and how do you rate the job McLaren's done in easing its problems? Let us know in the comments, give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and if you're not subscribed already, change that by hitting the button and join us again for more videos in the future.